Astrology like never before with Astromystic. Forget generic horoscopes. Astromystic combines the wisdom of a seasoned astrologer with advanced AI to bring you real-time, personalized astrology. We have just rolled out the new beta. Astromystic is your daily dose of astrology, or your mystical guide with love, career. You can ask anything. Our special Mystic Vision can help you see your future, while being the first AI astrology to also integrate the mundane astrology transits. Trained with the work of celebrity astrologer David Lawrence Palmer, the Leo King, and with over 12 years of astrology content, a solid 41,600 hours of it to be precise. The Leo King's prophecy astrology, and all his schools and astrology teachings, give you the opportunity to be part of history, as now astrology has never been able to do what it can now. With so many features, and exciting future ones that are rolling out, anyone can use this massive upgrade to astrology to learn, be more conscious, or see into why someone you like doesn't respond to you. What are their turn-ons and turn-offs? How do you prepare for the week, or next month? Is it a good time for love or work? And we give you the actual mind-blowing details. Let your astrology imagination run wild, or at least let Astromystic help you with our mystic visions. Astromystic ensures you get the freshest, most accurate astrological advice. Share the magic with friends and discover how the stars influence your life together. Astromystic. Put your ego aside and let Astromystic be your guide. Try it now, astromystic.ai, and try the beta for yourself.
Hi, what is going on, everyone? It's David Palmer, Leo King, and Dr. Ann Wohlcke here for History in the Stars, doing an awesome show for today, going deep into the history of the Renaissance and the concurrence astrologically. We are going with the planets right now that mirror the Renaissance that we are in now. How are you doing today, Ann? I was about to say tonight, but
I know. What are we doing here? It's too early.
It's too early.
But I'm doing great.
Good.
Happy to be here. Excited about our talk today.
I'm happy to do history, whether it's morning, noon, night, whether it's in the middle of the night or the day, although it's moved to the day, and I'm happy for it. We get to have more people participate, and I appreciate, especially, well, every show, but I appreciate that you really, I guess maybe we both share that same love of this time period and how you want to dive deep as a historian into this with me, because I learned so much from you, and there's a lot in this area that I feel I can learn so much still from. So I'm really happy to have you here for this show today.
Yeah, I'm excited too. But I always feel that I have a lot to learn from you about this as well, because you really just love the Italian Renaissance especially, right? And
yeah, I do.
You love the artwork, and it's hanging all around here. Right there. There's some over there and some right here, right?
I do have a lot of it around.
Yeah. I don't know if that, can people see that one? We should have moved it in.
No, they can't. All the Leonardo da Vinci stuff except for the Last Supper is hidden, as it should be.
Yes.
Well, actually, you were bringing up about Leonardo da Vinci. A lot of his work was never seen, right? Like all of his notebooks and all of his journals and all of his inventions, which I would say are pretty wild to think about, being in that 15th century and in the 1400s, and he's making planes. He's making the human anatomy that, to be honest with you, not a lot of people, I don't know if I'd have the guts to just be like, yeah, let's just take some dead bodies and let me just figure out what's really going on with this thing. I mean,
right.
And do it on your own.
I know.
Well, like, oh, let me get back to my painting afterwards.
I think that both of us were talking earlier about what are our favorite periods of history and when would we have liked to be alive. And the Renaissance is one of them, even though there was a high likelihood that you might die from the plague, or I don't know what else. If you said the wrong thing, I guess you could get in trouble with the church. But really there was so much new knowledge, and people were willing to explore on their own for whatever reason. And I think we're going to look at why that was today, right?
Yeah, because the time period is really interesting to go into it astrologically. the whole point of this segment of our history, astrology, is we're in let's call it, I guess, since there has not been a technical renaissance since. So I feel like, I don't know, does history or historians ever talk about what a future renaissance would look like? Or is everybody still so stuck on trying to figure out the past renaissance?
I don't know whether historians talk about the future renaissance very much. I haven't heard that, but there are people who talk about the history of the future, and they'll connect things to the future. But I mean, we're historians, so there's so much in the past we still need to know. And
right.
I think that's why, but a lot of times though, when we're doing history, we connect it to the present. And
right.
I think that we've been living through times where there's a lot to connect to the present, but maybe there always is. So,
I mean, I think that's where it gets interesting, is that astrologically, we're seeing so many of the transits play out. But I kind of have a weird astrological take that we are exiting the Renaissance period.
right.
And I'll cut to the chase. I feel like people want things to go back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
But with Renaissance comes so many great things, and then it comes with, I told you, the bag is full in a Renaissance. Everything from plagues to innovation in architecture and art, and there's a lot of cool stuff we're going to go into all this, and then the astrology that pairs with it. But I think my main message at the beginning, and why my version of it would be that we're doing this show, is like to appreciate this moment so much that I know it could be crazy, but the history shows it was crazy then. I mean, the events that happened during the Renaissance are just, I would say, at the par of where we're at with society and unknowingness, but also all this information and all this new energy at the same time, that it's such a great moment in life to cherish this moment, because we all wish we could live in the Renaissance. I was making fun of the 1800s with you because I feel like it felt more backwards than it did in the Renaissance. Like, it just kind of felt like, well, I got my ale, my cider ale, and I got my kid and my woman, and we're going to go out and go in the woods. I at least in the Renaissance period, there was so much in the flourishing of energy, especially in art. And it, in many ways to me, and maybe this is where you can answer this question, do you feel that the people in that time period, what were they looking back at to try and almost feel like that they could be back part of something that was a flourishing moment? Is there anything that they reference to trying to be like what they thought was a Renaissance period prior to them?
Well, I think that the people we think of as Renaissance thinkers, right, especially the people who wrote, they were looking back to the classical era. They were looking back to the Greeks and the Romans, and even prior to that, as this time where learning was flourishing, right? And they talked about, there's a lot of people talking about the library in Alexandria, which by this time didn't exist. And I think that they thought of the past as a time when there was a lot of learning, but I'm not sure whether it was ordinary people who ever would have thought that, right? So your ordinary peasant, like we were talking earlier before the show about Leonardo da Vinci and how he was born from peasant parents, and he was a peasant. So he lived at this time when you could be a peasant and start to immerse yourself in these new techniques and new understandings that were coming from the East. Right, so there were new ideas, and these were very influential, and people were doing new techniques. Also, people like artists were starting to become more respected in their worlds.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe you want to go into that. I have to put this. The high vibe link didn't work, so I have to go reset the.
Oh no.
We can keep going on the show, but I just have to fix the stream key. But I'll say before I go do that, I think that's the thing. The amount of, I don't know what the word would be, but I'll call it dedication, commitment, and striving to be the best at what you are. That is where maybe in my concurrence, it's harder to see it in these times because people who became masters at what they were, artists, architects, writers, creating inventions, they stood out. And I think we can find that in today's world, but it feels a little bit kind of like where people almost go, yeah, that's another new thing in the world being brought out. Where at that time, it's like, this is changing the world forever. Mm-hmm. But we're having world-changing things that show up all the time, but I almost feel like people become a little numb to it now. They forget about it.
Right.
I mean, when they're telling you that aliens either live with us on Earth or they're living on the moon, and people are just like, like whatever. Where 20 years ago, that would have been, everybody would have been talking, but maybe that's where the phone, it is the printing press, but it's one that keeps you isolated kind of in your own self. Whereas we used to share in the history, a book was shared, the newspaper was shared, letters were shared, like read this letter I got. Today, it's kind of like somebody just forwarded me an email.
But we share elsewhere, I think, right? We share on social media. We do share, but I think that what you were saying about aliens, if we heard that aliens set up a campsite on the moon today, we would probably be a lot more suspicious about it than people were in the 1960s. Because now we've had a lot more experience with the government or other people kind of controlling what we say. And I think in the Renaissance, this is also the case, that when someone like Leonardo da Vinci was working on his new artistic discoveries, or when new architecture was being built, people were excited and it was different and they didn't really know what to make of it. So if you start building a new dome on a church, on a huge church, also it's slowly being built, so you don't really recognize the impact right away. Yeah. And eventually it's there, and then it becomes a new thing that you think of in the skyline of Florence. So I think that by now, if we think about astrologically, it's funny that, you're talking about history and then I want to get to the astrology of, we are coming to the end of the Renaissance, like you just said. So astrologically, I guess you would say that we're saturated with all the new things now. It's not like a novelty. We're used to it. And just like in the Renaissance, where slowly states started to use all of the byproducts of the Renaissance, all of the art and the music and all of that started to be used to support states instead of just being these new exciting achievements. So people were probably a little bit more cynical about it. Also, I think astrologically, it started to be the time where the Roman Catholic Church officially, figured out how to counter all of the new things. That's and there true. Started to be regulations. So it's just I think it's a more world sounds like review. Now. Maybe it does.
Well, why don't we go into the astrology really quick, because I feel that will kind of help us build this context up. So whether it's very weird because the timing is hard to get exact, but I'd say the consensus of people like you, Dr. Ann Wohlcke, historian and amazing professor of history, that it's the fall of Constantinople that they, from what I was looking and you were looking, and we even used ChatGPT and everything else that we could, that's really the marker point. And I laughed because that's really when the West falls to the East. The Ottoman Empire in 55 days takes over Constantinople. And that is kind of the last of the old Roman, trying to live itself, but it is very Catholic Church still in there. And of course, after the Holy Wars that had been so ended badly, let's say,
Right.
that's kind of like the last nail in the coffin, I guess, of that kind of like, I guess we're going to just let them take over.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what's weird is it springs up the energy to revive. It really is Christ-based, a lot of the Renaissance, through the artwork, through the church really kind of being the one that, and a lot of the artwork of that 1450s and the 1490s, it really is. When I go to museums, I always see those beautiful art pieces, but they're always in like gold and they're like 3 doors and they always have Jesus and they always have some sort of like Christian theme. Is that something that you see come up a lot?
You mean, is the religious art something that comes up a lot?
Yeah.
Or?
That's contributed to the Renaissance?
So if you ever go to any museum and you go to the Renaissance section, it is surprising how much of it is material from churches, things that were displayed on altars. So those triptych things with the 3 doors, those were from people's altars, whether it was in a church or people had private altars. But it's just like when we talked about the Enlightenment era and Isaac Newton, for example. More of what he did was religious based. And so at this time in the Renaissance, we might think of all of the humanistic things that have a connection to today. But the art was really being used so much for churches.
Yeah.
Right? And then, but on the other hand, what was new in the Renaissance was this was all being propagated and financed by these new people like Cosimo de' Medici that I was talking about earlier, who was kind of, I guess, Lord of Florence, who has all of his family's money and wants to start investing in this artwork to make Florence look great and to make his family look great.
That makes sense.
So, yeah.
Well, the transits that we have to kind of look at this as 1453 to the beginning of the 1600s. So really it's about a almost 200-year time frame. And the peak of it being in the 1500s and the mid 1500s is like the peak of the Renaissance. From what we were, well, I don't know, you're the historian.
It depends
Would you
on
say
where
it
you're
depends
looking.
on where you're looking?
So, you know, the
some of
peak
it's
the-
1590s, some of it's 1560s, some of
and
it's
then there's the Northern Renaissance that we really associate with the late 16th and early 17th centuries.
right.
Yeah.
So what I find interesting is Pluto and Leo and the Pluto-Uranus conjunction, and that there were 2 Pluto-Uranus conjunctions that happened during the Renaissance in Leo. And now we're in the Pluto-Uranus and Virgo. And what I think is also interesting is at that time, you know, look at Saturn and Neptune. We're in Saturn and Neptune right now. Now we're in Pisces, and that actually does happen in 1523, although this is 1453. But there is something about these big outer planet conjunctions that set these things off. But I really found it really interesting, just the fall of Constantinople, that Mars in Cancer approaching Uranus at the end of Cancer at a cusp, and then it's all heading towards Pluto and Leo. What's interesting is Pluto-Leo, of course, pops up again 248 years later, and then, of course, it pops up again in our time. So it's like, oh, okay. Like, that's what we lived through in the 50s, late 40s, or yeah, in the 40s, late 40s, into the 50s. And so we didn't get a Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Leo. We got it in Virgo. And there's something about Pluto-Uranus conjunctions, like the 60s, for example. In 64, we had it. That felt like the Renaissance period of, well, I guess society is trying these different looks, trying different art. I mean, it looks different. You know, going to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco is
Right.
right, or becoming the beatniks' time is ending, and the true hippie starts. So we have to look at it kind of like in a weird context is like, there's this trying to find the human spirit, I would call a Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like what is a human spirit and what does the collective do? Now, because the Renaissance period happened when it was in Leo, I was telling you, and now this is just from my own observations as an astrologer, that whether we were just talking about Leonardo da Vinci before we got into the segment, or I could use John Dee, or I could use Francis Bacon, there's always this connection to the monarchy. So a lot, like, you know, I always made a joke in a lot of my old horoscopes is like, if you're just out there strumming a guitar during the Renaissance, it's not like today where Justin Bieber was on YouTube and now he's like, you know, everybody in the world knows who he is, right? Mm-hmm. That we're in a time to where it's not this Leo, you need to go through the king, the queen, and we have to remember that the star Regulus, the fixed star Regulus, moved into Virgo in 2012. So we've seen this massive shift of the fixed star Regulus that's very regal and about Leo and about this monarch aspect. But because it's all been in this Virgo energy, it's where the common man and woman becomes the Renaissance itself, right? This separation kind of from the monarch being the ones. And if I look at today's world, whether it's in politics, you know, people don't find it that exciting anymore. Like you're sitting next to a politician in a picture. That's not that. If anything, you get more dislikes.
Right.
Right. So that's, I think, where it's like a different kind of Renaissance, where it's like one to where the people are expressing it and the people are the ones with social media and everything. And even in the 60s through television and all this stuff, there has to be a communication element. And that's what's really weird is the sun was in Gemini, the south node in Gemini, the nodes in Sag, Gemini. And near the end of it, we see the same thing. The same transits come back. Mm-hmm. And it's weird because in many ways, I do feel that looking at this chart and looking at like where the astrology is now, is I feel like we are coming towards the end of what we consider like a Renaissance, and there's the possibility of something that is greater than what we would call a Renaissance, because I think that the downside of the Renaissance comes power struggles, because that's the other thing is this, we saw that in the 60s, this dominance over, I don't want the people expressing themselves.
Right.
And I feel like it was almost like the controlling of who's above during the Renaissance time. Then just, you know, any commoner can make it. Like when we did Nostradamus, you know, a plague hits and he's at school, but it gets canceled. And, you know, he's one of those people that goes, I'm going to go figure out how to fix the plague and miss school. And I think it was Nostradamus who, was it his hand? Who was it? Was it Nostradamus or Isaac Newton who had hands from working out in the fields and was unsure about going to college because that was not normal? It was Nostradamus.
Not Isaac Newton.
It was
sure.
Nostradamus.
He wasn't out working in the field. No.
Yeah, it was Nostradamus who was working in the fields as young, and to go to college and have your hands messed up from the fields was like not normal because only the elite went. So that's the other kind of thing too, is like, I feel like a Renaissance period is where we all learn and grow as a society at just epic levels.
Right. Huh. I'm sitting here thinking about the 60s connection now, which I hadn't thought about like that, because it's almost that, so you obviously have an explosion of a different type of art during the 60s and expression and everything, right? But it was also more of a cultural revolution where, and I'm not talking about in the Chinese sense of a cultural revolution,
right.
I'm talking about just the way people were behaving and the revolution in morality, right?
Yeah.
And in the Renaissance, I guess actually, you know, there was a little bit of that. But anyway, I'm sorry, I just went off on a tangent trying to connect
No,
that.
you're good.
Because I was almost thinking, is there something about the modern Renaissance, if we think about this period of time that we've been in since the 1960s, for us, we think of that as, we're not connected anymore to the 60s. But if you look astrologically, it very much is this same kind of thing. People might look back on one day and say it was a Renaissance.
Right.
But especially if you think about from the early 60s, right, back to the 1800s, there's not all that much difference in the way that people live their lives and who has control or power, and that it would be cool to have your picture with a president or or whatever. But then you get to a situation like where even in the 70s, if you've ever seen that picture of Elvis with Richard Nixon, I don't know why I'm thinking of that right now, then you know that something's changed, because that looks weird.
It does look weird.
Well,
and I was going to say too, I can use astrology, and I don't know, the Renaissance is like more looking at these very intense periods. And they say this is the start, but really it's kind of the fall, literally, of a time period. And then it's not like the next day, the Renaissance starts.
No.
Right? So I'm looking at that North Node in Sag, and I'm going, as an astrologer going, okay, when it gets to Leo and starts conjuncting that Pluto and Uranus, because I know Uranus is going to be within the time period of going through all of Leo, and that North Node's in Sag going to Leo, okay, it's about the time when it's going to come towards that end. So I'm going to just have some fun really quick and take the transit for May 29th of 1453. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, let's look at years. Let me get that North Node towards Leo. So the Pluto-Uranus conjunction happens in 1556, right here in Leo at 11 and 12 degrees of Leo. That's also interesting because that's right where the planetary North Node of Venus sits.
Is that where?
Or sorry, of Neptune. The planetary North Node of Neptune sits in Leo at that degree, which I can actually put that in as a point to display to people. So I can go to the nodes, and we're going to go the ascending node of Neptune in that time. 4 degrees. So it moved, but that's what's interesting though, is there's that massive conjunction happening over that ascending node of Neptune, which is art, music, and all that stuff. And especially in Leo, very creative. So it might sound kind of bad, but we're not getting that in our lifetime. So.
And which chart is this?
This is just 3 years after the fall of Constantinople, the actual Pluto-Uranus conjunction happening.
Okay.
And it happening where today's ascending node of Neptune is.
Oh, okay. I get it.
So you can see right here that Neptune with the ascending node, right? And it actually had Chiron on there, so it's kind of funny because I feel like the Renaissance is a little bit of a healing for the West. Because it loses to the East, it loses to the Ottoman Empire, even just the fall, the sack of Rome 1,000 years prior, like the whole Western idea just falls. And it has to find a way to revive itself.
So the idea of reunifying and the idea of making the East Christian, right? And being under the Roman church or whatever it is, or under Christianity. But what's interesting is that it's a fall for the church and anyone that's supporting that idea of reconquering this part of the world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is why there's a Renaissance, right? Because the scholars, or it's one of the reasons why, all of the scholars who were in Constantinople flee to the West, and they bring all of these wonderful books and all of these ideas that hadn't been studied in the West for a really long time. Or maybe they had been, but they were within monasteries, or, they might have been locked away somewhere. But most of those, the ideas that they brought were new, or new translations of things, or books by people that no one knew existed.
Right.
So it's a rebirth in many ways because of that, right? That's the Renaissance part of it. So it's one thing dies, and then this new movement emerges that takes on this completely different life and starts something new.
So what I did, because you brought up, we were talking about that rebirth, and it's Jupiter, Pluto conjunct, and then Jupiter, Uranus. So in our last 4 years, we had Jupiter, Pluto meet in Capricorn 3 times. The time that it met 3 times prior was in the 50s during Pluto and Leo, where Jupiter and Pluto met 3 times in Leo. We just had Jupiter and Uranus conjunct. So they got it in the same, like within a month and a half to 2 months, a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction and a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Leo. Right? So that's Jupiter, Pluto, Uranus. How different does that feel than Saturn? So we were Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn in 2020. So I'm going to just, like, for fun, go, what happened in 1457 that maybe pops up Renaissance-wise? What was that? What was up at that time with King James II of Scotland in the late 1450s? I guess.
Ye football and ye golf be utterly...
Oh, he was King of Scots. I remember. Okay.
So what is he talking about? He's obviously talking about sports. I don't know. A game of golf. Is that when golf was invented?
Probably. I mean, it's Scottish.
See? But what is... So 1457, we're looking for...
We're looking for... Because that was Jupiter, Pluto, and Jupiter, Uranus within a month and a half conjunction in Leo. So Uranus and Pluto had just met, and now here comes Jupiter to meet with Pluto and with Uranus in Leo, of all places. So it's a huge, and there's a North Node in Virgo. Here, we'll go back to it really quick. And there's a North Node in Virgo. That means that the eclipses are starting to come in to Leo and Aquarius after this conjunction.
Okay.
It's also Chiron in Leo, where if people watch a lot of my crazy stuff, Chiron in Leo is when it is on its farthest orbit. It's farther than Uranus's orbit, just for the moment. It's when humanity can break out of the container we live in.
Huh. Wow. And that's when it's in Leo, huh?
It's when it's in Leo, which makes sense to me, though.
But right at the end of Leo?
It's at the beginnings of Leo, and it's not in Leo for a long time. So it's not like we see it in Aries right now. It's almost a decade. It's not a decade, but it's longest through Taurus and Aries, right? And then it's the shortest through Libra, Scorpio.
Well, then I think what's interesting, if that's the time when you can break out of the old system, is that what?
Yeah, like that is like the biggest system buster moment of all time, I would say. Now, we have parts of that happening now that's more rhythmic and kind of like coming one at a time, year after year, where they're getting it all at once. So it's kind of like the universe tore a hole and said, let whatever wants to come in, and whatever wants to come out, come out. And it's funny because that's happening now, but it's happening more staged. Like it's happening more in a condensed period, but there's a little bit more wider gap.
This, I think, is interesting. If you look at August 14th, the main Psalter was the second major book printed with movable type in the West. The first to be wholly finished with mechanically.
Including color.
New innovations. And the first to carry a printed date is printed for the Elector of Mainz. So
I think that, you know what's weird is color TV in the first parts in Technicolor and movies is in the 60s. I'm
when
gonna
was Chiron in
I just
Leo
want to,
before?
Technicolor. I want to just make sure that I'm correct on the dates. Mid 50s, I guess they did, but I think for more people to kind of have that ability.
This is at the 1939 World's Fair, RCA Laboratories introduced the all-electrical television series. Okay, by 1953.
Okay, so Pluto and Leo.
That's interesting. So then that's when the technology is there, but it's not. It's showing you what's going to be possible
Correct.
and not used by everybody
That's
yet.
a great point.
And so that's the same thing with just the second major book printed using movable type. That is the revolutionary technology.
Yeah, and I guess a new king in Sweden ended the war between Sweden and Denmark and restoring the Kalmar Union. So what we know today is allies, Sweden and Denmark. I guess they got restored then. Oh, Charles the Eighth of Sweden is declared disposed, the Archbishop of Sweden. Oh, I guess that makes sense. And then the Swedish, once he's gone, then everything's okay.
So there's new activity, new rulership in Scandinavia is happening around then. Seems like a lot of...
It's such a big year that I'm a little bit like, well, you know what? Let's see who's born in that year. Oh, these are deaths. If there's a King Henry is the seventh is born with that
first
with that energy. And he had to fight to stay in power to keep the Tudor line going.
Yeah, he had to fight to establish the Tudor line.
Mm-hmm.
He had to defeat the old
And he made a lot of money.
And he got a lot of money for the state. I mean, because that's the other thing that's happening at this time is that the power of the church is, being fractured a little bit, but states are gaining the power.
And his first child is Arthur that he names over the Camelot Arthur.
Yeah.
Who dies. To let Henry then become the heir that then secedes from the church in the middle of the Renaissance and actually kind of helps the Renaissance more. Mm-hmm. So he's actually the person who's born that brings the child, very Leo, right? It's about the child. The child of Henry VII. One dies that's supposed to bring back the Arthur idea of Camelot. But Henry comes through, changes the whole world forever, and allows the Renaissance to keep going. He's kind of like the stimulant to it. Like, oh yeah, we can we could leave the church. Bye-bye.
He's more than a stimulant. I think he was like the shock and awe campaign.
He is, but that's what's kind of interesting of the astrology is it brings forth the person who has the child who does that.
That's interesting. And I never thought about this, that Prince Arthur, who was supposed to reestablish this idea of Camelot in England, Henry VII thought they needed that to establish the Tudor line, that they needed to go back to this old mythological or maybe real king and establish that idea so that it could be the oldest, most glorious English reign. And then in the end, he didn't even need that. It took this completely new style.
Yeah,
Plus,
so he was born in August too. Oh no, his reign, his reign was there. He was born in January. So he was born with Jupiter right before it came there, but it's still like there. He died at 52 with his Chiron return in Leo. And that's when Henry takes the throne with Chiron and Leo.
Henry
That's
VIII
kind of interesting.
Or
Henry VIII does. Henry VIII because
comes back when Chiron's in Leo again
Yeah.
and takes the throne.
Mm-hmm.
These things are so weird when we see how the patterns work.
So yeah,
It's
there was
funny.
Arthur, his kid, who dies. So like that's the kind of thing about the Renaissance that I think we see a lot of it now. Like we're terrified when we see something happen in the world. But we also live in a world where there's so many things happening. We're driving on freeways going 80 miles an hour in vehicles. We're flying in the sky. We got so much going on. And at that period, it was so slow in the 1300s, you could hear crickets for 2 years, and that would have been your entertainment.
And birds.
Yeah, but but I'm sure there was some person who was like, those crickets sound real good the last 2 years. I don't know where they went. And you were just trying to stay alive. And also the idea of architecture. I mean, all the cathedrals of the 1200s, because of the Holy Wars and because of the Crusades, end in the end of at 1280s, at the end of it. There's no more big cathedrals with the big stained glass, artwork, and astrological artwork too. That all ends. So the dark ages are also, I guess, historically what kind of helped the Renaissance, because it's so dark for so long, with society not really innovating or doing much, or people creating much. It's like watching Braveheart every day.
But for those people, because, earlier we were having this conversation and I said, maybe souls born at that time think that's what they're supposed to be doing, is we're maintaining the flow of what is.
I love that concept.
But because
and I do.
I know, because I've always also thought that would be such a boring time to live, but I'm trying to get into the mindset of what that is. But we were born right now, so obviously we're interested in this more mutable period of time.
Look at this artwork for when Arthur's born and how the paintings were of the prodigal son to be born that doesn't become king. So you could use the Lion King analogy and be like, Scar was the second child, and Mufasa was the king, and then the king dies, so he gets Simba to peace out, and Scar becomes king, even though Henry VIII isn't Scar, but some people look at him like Scar.
I've always thought of the Lion King as Richard III is Scar, and then sort of your Henry Tudor is Simba.
Yeah.
So maybe establishing that line.
And I think, because I'm sure we'll go through some of the pictures, it's like there's an idealism, like there's this very big, higher than mighty, the highest of highs, ethereal, visionary element to the Renaissance period. Like everything is so like, the king and the queen really do love each other. And they have the kid that the angels love, because they show an angel down here, right here, that came to Henry VII. They also have the rose there, which I think is really interesting.
That's the Lancastrian
with
rose,
the B.
which is the red.
With the B, though.
Red is
It's
Lancastrian.
the rose cross.
Yes. But this was also signifying, it must have been Lancastrian, because that was the line.
Yeah.
But the Tudor rose that they create is the red and white one, so that they can bring both lines together. But that's kind of off the point.
It's also a little Annunciation, like with the angels coming to Henry VII, and I think his wife was Henry
VII's wife was Elizabeth, wasn't it? Or
Lady
no,
Margaret
Catherine.
Beaufort.
Oh, sorry. Is it? The flowers are for Margaret Beaufort, mother of King Henry VII.
Oh, okay.
I think it's Catherine is his wife. I don't remember.
Or maybe it's Anne. I mean, I have it right here. Oh, Catherine. Oh, well, Arthur's spouse was Catherine of Aragon.
No, it is.
I know, but
Elizabeth of York,
Henry
isn't it?
VII was married to
Elizabeth, I believe.
Elizabeth of York.
Yeah.
She didn't last too long.
Well, she did what she needed to do, and that was to bring the two lines together. Right?
That's kind of sad. But I think that's really interesting about that Arthur kind of like visionary infancy. Here's the family of Henry VII depicted on the illuminated page, and this Annunciation, which is what does come through the Renaissance, through Leonardo, Da Vinci, and others. There were so many other great. Botticelli does his Annunciation. Like they really use parts of the Bible to really be the big center art pieces, and then the church backs those with money and everything, and kind of glorifies these people in a way, because the artwork's so great, and you can see it, and go to you can go to Italy and you can go see it, and they really make it pop.
Right. So you pointed out so many really great things from this page, that how Henry VII is throwing this back to, really he's kind of evoking these ideas of chivalry. And I had a student who wrote a really great paper about this, or did a great project about Arthur and how they used these old stories to try to connect to the English past, and to use these romantic ideals, because chivalry was kind of having a comeback at this time. But those are all old ideas, and this was still a time when you could try to look to the past to legitimize your present. But by the time of Henry VIII, he is smart enough to realize if he's going to look to the past to legitimize his present, he's going to lose. The state of England is going to lose, right? So he can no longer do that, because it also means bringing in the church as an authority, because it is the church, like you just suggested. The church then ultimately has to legitimize your authority as a monarch at the time of Henry VII. Because if the church says, no, actually, you're not the official monarch, we want, you killed Richard III, the rightful monarch, or whatever. So there's a lot about this idea of things happening because it's ordained. So it would make sense why the Annunciation is...
Yeah, so here's 1443 through 45, an Annunciation, like one of the more, I guess right before that Renaissance period really does begin, although they do say that some of this is the infancy of it, per se.
The infancy of the Renaissance?
Of the Renaissance, yeah. But it's like looking at the gallery of artwork, because there was a lot of it that goes back far back, but it's really the work that comes like 1443, 1450, then here we go, here's 1470. So it starts to be, this is what I was talking about, is a lot of the art I always see at that time, the beginning of the Renaissance, it's like in these framed, standing, wooden frames of gold, or sometimes it's wood, painted gold or whatever. But then, of course, there's 1472, and that's Leonardo da Vinci, and that's his painting that moves him to become a master, his last like training. What was he at that point? He was like
he was an apprentice, or
and it was about the backgrounds. It wasn't even about the forefront. It was about the backgrounds that he was learning to master. And I think that's just so hilarious, because it's so good that even the background is overwhelming to take in, yet the front is so beautiful. But he was like not concerned about that. His task was to master backdrops.
Yeah. It's an amazing painting.
It is.
Imagine that being your final exam, right? That's basically what it was, that he got to move out of being an apprentice to being a master.
Yeah, and so if we kind of look at that time period astrologically, because I'm looking at that 1457, then of course there's the months that follow, and the next year where the North Node comes into Leo, and that's where the eclipses happen with Mars, Uranus, Pluto. So I would say that would have been the kickoff of the Renaissance. So we go to 72, and it's shifted here. 1472, yeah. And that's Saturn. There's the South Node again with the Sun. So that has been since 1453 and the fall of Constantinople, it's been one full nodal cycle, exact, and eclipses that have gone through a full cycle. And now you're seeing Leonardo da Vinci ready to go. You're seeing, if I just kind of use that, I'm using the Annunciation as kind of like a base point kind of the Renaissance, because the artwork wise, you just start seeing it become, look at the past of it. And then like, there's something about Da Vinci that does bridge it at that time period to where everybody starts getting involved and making this. And so this is Botticelli's version. And when I studied a lot about this Annunciation work, it was only Da Vinci, and even Botticelli tried to copy Da Vinci with the background there, right? But what I found out was that Da Vinci's the only one who actually showed Gabriel being like not forcing Mary to have the baby by God. Like there's like a divine loving presence where the rest is always Gabriel is pushing it on Mary. But the other person was Botticelli where it's Gabriel kneeling to the Virgin Mary. Where the other ones are kind of masculine-wise is like this, you're going to have a baby whether you like it or not. Right? So
this one is so...
Right? Like they're always above and they're always like, here's a good one. You're taking this child whether you like it or not.
Well, but look, it's because God says so.
Of course, but...
Well,
that's
but she kind of looks like she's refusing a little bit, right?
Correct. Like there's that whole. I mean, I don't want to get into patriarchy stuff, but there is a little patriarchal aspect to it of like, you're taking this damn kid, and you don't even have a choice. You don't even get to have sex. You just have to have a baby.
That's
like, people complain today about women's rights and abortion rights. It's like, go back to the Renaissance and be married in pictures.
But look at what the child was. Wasn't it worth her sacrifice? But anyway, this is the 17th century, so that's really interesting that's
kind of the end, and it kind of does flop.
But really, the one that you pointed out, I always look over here because your painting used to be over there, I think. The Annunciation, the Botticelli one, right? Or that's the one. No,
I have
Da Vinci one.
I have that private, the wedding, the wedding couple that Botticelli did, which is my favorite one, and it shows that nobody cares about your love at a wedding.
It's
the only people that care are the people that are getting married. But everybody's there for the food and the drink, and you know.
But that's an important part of a marriage because it has to be the community sanctioning it, I think. I mean, if you're wealthy, but the Annunciation by Da Vinci.
Yeah, it's still the best.
That one?
Right
because
here. That's the one.
It's interesting how much Mary is a focus of this one, and I don't know what she's got her hands on. Is it a book or something, or what's on that stand?
Well, there's a lot of Da Vinci Code stuff with this. One, it can't be the Bible since the Bible wasn't made.
Well, it could be one of the
It would
prophets,
be the old, right. It would be an old writing of a prophet.
Daniel, I think, is usually the one they talk about.
It could be that. Oops. Or it could have been the wise men because you see her once Jesus is born. Botticelli does do the best Magi. So if you look up the Botticelli, the Magi child, the adoration of the Magi. I don't know why I know this stupid stuff, but I do. Here we go. I like this one because, of course, this one's about the astrologers. That there's 3 Magi in here. If anybody, this is like Where's Waldo, and this one he does this one in 1476. So he does this before his Annunciation one, which is done later on. Which is kind of interesting. He does this 2 years after Leonardo da Vinci does the Annunciation. So a lot of it begins with all the story of the Bible and Jesus, but I think a lot of the money, though, was coming from the church.
And people like the Medici, though.
And the Medici, yeah.
And also, a lot of the artworks that Da Vinci put out were financed by the duke he was working for. I'm trying to remember who it was. But he was in charge of, after he made it through that whole apprenticeship and did all that wonderful work, he started to work for a duke in Italy, and he was in charge of creating things for the festivals. So creating things like the dragon or the lion. I have a picture of it from when I went to that exhibition. But we need to look at the.
But you know what's really, you know what some of the secrets of this are? They have people in here who look like as if they're part of a church that doesn't exist yet, like cardinal-like. And one of the wise men is up here. Remember, the wise men were not. They looked more nomadic. They looked magi. But like even the red here, but that's kind of the Roman energy, right? Like the Roman senators or people in the Roman times. I did a lot of work on researching about the three magi since I'm in astrology. So you have one right here that's not it that you think. He's asleep. Right? And you have to actually look, because then you see in the background too, there's like the Roman pillars, right? So this is like this Roman aspect. And a lot of people think that he is a magi, but he's not. That he's a magi above, and you see that the light of God comes down on the child, and then that's where they anoint Jesus with the oils. And this is why kings do it now. They're all trying to be like Jesus.
Isn't it interesting that the light coming down, I've only learned this from you.
It's
Does
hermetic.
It look like it's golden yods?
Yes,
or whatever coming down?
it's hermetic. Right? Even always her look, if you just like look at the angles of things, it's really interesting. And Jesus's face angles. Although Jesus kind of looks like, what are you doing? Right? He's also got the halo around his head. Do you see that?
Yeah. But isn't he making that little, is that the
As above,
Hierophant kind of symbol?
yeah.
Like he's blessing?
Right.
And he's barely even conscious and he's already doing it.
Right. That the only Magi's, they're not wearing normal, they wear this. So he's like a young Magi. And the other one that I had found was, forgot where he was, but yeah, anyway, it is an interesting time period. Oh, there's a crown on the ground.
Oh, yeah. Maybe foreshadowing this thorn crown of thorns.
But so, yeah, like I think it's interesting that that's kind of it's part of the Italy aspect of things, but it's also trying to kind of like go back to Rome in a way. Because like there is a part where if you really look at Christianity, they love Rome so much that even though I don't know, it's one of those Roman Catholic, or you get into, where is the Catholic Church? It's in Rome.
Right.
That there is this, to me, the Renaissance is trying to bring that energy back of like that time when Rome was great. And even Nostradamus and John Dee, they talk about the Republic coming back and the Republic coming back and the Republic coming back. And then America is all about this Republic and the old way, and they use the old idea of the Senate, all this stuff. Right. It's really interesting that our Renaissance periods always kind of have these things, and I feel like we're in that right now. Look what's happening in the world right now. People are wanting the old Republic back again, and they feel like it's gone astray. And people are going back to Jesus more than ever.
If we go back to the... was it 1457 was the chart you were showing?
Oh, when the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction happens with Pluto? Or it's
Yeah,
1453, they say the date, but I think you and I are both in the right concurrence that it would have been years later, after the fall of Constantinople, for things to actually take place. So
Right. So that
yeah,
chart
right here.
then, when did that happen for us, is what I'm trying to ask.
Jupiter, Uranus, and Pluto?
Yeah, and then also Chiron, if it was in that same spot or close.
Well, you know, I'll take it to where this will be interesting, right? So let's go to 1964, because you have a Pluto-Uranus conjunction, but you don't have Jupiter right there. You have Jupiter here in Taurus that was in trine, building up, but that comes into a square point actually. So instead of it being in a conjunction point, it's not. So what you do to go backwards, although I don't have my solar flyer because I'm on a Mac right now, but I can do Uranus conjunct Pluto and go backwards. They're long enough to where there's not many. Okay, so the one prior to that was in 1892 in Gemini, and that's also, oh, that's Neptune Pluto. Did I do that? Neptune, I need to do Uranus Pluto, sorry. Let's go to 65. Okay. 1851 in Aries. Now with Saturn. Saturn's at its fall position there. And personally, I would say that this does kickstart the, not a renaissance, but it just, Pluto-Uranus is the kickstart to, all right, society, move on. Let's go. But in Aries, it's pretty mechanical, basic. Aries is basic, the start of things. So if you think about it, the photography comes out at that point. Neptune comes into Pisces, right? The Oregon Trail already had been set up. The railroads. It really is the Industrial Revolution becoming huge until the 60s when that kind of shifts, right?
But then 65, it happens again.
65 is like the technical conjunction. 64 is the interesting because it's like so close, but Saturn's in opposition and Chiron, and so then you go backwards and you get to 1710, and that one's at 28 Aries, and that's where Regulus was on top of Regulus, and so that's where you start seeing, well, the monarchies try to have their last big stand of being elaborate, let's say. And society still dealing with monarchies, but it doesn't go well when Pluto comes to Aquarius and opposes it. Right? By the 1780s. But that one at the same time was with the South Node. So it's almost like they thought the Renaissance was going to happen again and it didn't. It's like a... And again, that's a North Node in Aquarius, meaning with Uranus in opposition, and then it's dispositing that it's going to be about people breaking away. So then the one prior to that is 1598, and we have that one in Aries. And that's, to me, the slowdown, the end of the Renaissance right there. But of course, I think I showed you the Nostradamus prediction chart, 1732, and to me, that's really kind of where it's like he knows how to predict like when it's over, and we've moved on and things are out of that era. And he picked 1732. So, but that's what's interesting. You go prior to this Aries one, and you get to that era. Sorry, that's the retrograde, and then 1597, and then boom, 1456, Leo.
So you're identifying
So
Pluto
the fact
and
that
Uranus.
it was Leo, Aries, Leo, Aries, Virgo. We're in a new one.
Okay. So that's
But it's
like,
also the sign that deals with the common person. It deals with a shift of reality. It deals with the fields and work and service and being more humble and making adjustments. It's weird though, because it does bring it to this more common people. Plus we've seen more Aquarius transits in our life, and the most planets that could ever be in Aquarius in the 60s that was with and followed that Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo. And then here we are with Pluto that's going to make its full ingress into Aquarius here. It's already there, Helio. We're in it right now in Western Tropical, geo-wise, but it does retrograde back into Capricorn here in a couple months. And to me, that is kind of the end of like this way we've been living, because at the end of it in Nostradamus's chart, just to kind of give some context of why I feel this is like, Nostradamus was the master astrologer that I would say of the Renaissance. That he always talks about in his books the end of cycles. So Saturn at the 0 point is the end of a cycle with Saturn. Jupiter on the opposite side at the 0 point of Libra. He didn't know about Pluto, although I have proof that he did, but that's for another story. It's really weird that he has Venus exactly. I'm going to have to take rid of us for a second. He has Venus exactly on the north node, the ascending node of Neptune in Leo. And look at that, Sun, south node, Gemini, just how it started with the fall of Constantinople. That's how good he is.
Yeah. Wow. So that's the official end of the Renaissance for him.
That I would say that's the official end.
Yeah. So for us, it might have kicked off in 1851, are you saying? Or what Renaissance are we in?
Well, I would say that we've been in one since the 60s. But it's going to end quicker and not last as long because it's more condensed what we're going through. And it was in Virgo, meaning you're going to feel it for a short amount of time and then, right, Leo tries to make it ever last. And I think that the Regulus transition from Leo, the fixed star Regulus, to move into Virgo in 2012 is why our idea of the supreme powers or celebrity or all this are dying right now. So the Renaissance has to be looked at as from the common person, and I don't think people are ready for that yet. They still look for their celebrity. They still look for who to be impressed by. They still look for who's the person in charge, who's the person that can make it happen, who's in the spotlight, when the universe ain't supporting that anymore.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So it's a new Renaissance because it's like the people taking their power back and knowing what to do. It reminds me of the English Civil War, which is a good example of why that's not considered the Renaissance.
Because it was people taking power, and then using it to impose a new ruler.
And then bringing the monarch back, which even Nostradamus predicted. That's why he did 1732. Like, they're going to take down the powers and then bring them back. But by 1732, they won't do that again. But in history, or he goes in the future, there'll be cycles where that'll happen again. But at this point, famines, plagues, all that will be done. But using this work, where we are going is like the bringing back of the times where he always reminds us through his preface time, pay attention to when it starts doing these things. We're not in this. We're coming out of that.
Interesting.
So it's kind of a weird one because I think that astrology, I mean, that's the astrology, right? But I feel like that's, you see that Jupiter-Pluto-Uranus conjunction and that really kicks it all off. It's the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that we just had. Ironically enough, though, it wasn't with Pluto. The last Jupiter-Uranus was not with Pluto. The one before that was not with Pluto, right? To get to the Jupiter conjunct Uranus conjunction with Pluto, I'll show you that. We'll have to go. Oh, hold on. I have to get out of this. Go to one. Let me get to 1900 here. Okay, there we go. There we go. Jupiter, Uranus, yeah, Pluto's back. 1914, 27, Jupiter, Uranus, Aries, and then Jupiter, Uranus, Aries again, yeah, 1927, 1928, 41, and that's Pluto ahead, and that's Pluto in Leo, and Chiron coming in. So if you think about that in the 40s, we go through World War II, the fall of Constantinople becomes, or the fall of the axis of evil becomes the Pluto idea of World War II, and a renaissance that kind of starts there. You see Chiron coming in and Pluto coming in like they did in the 1450s. Then you look at the wood that came after, and in 1954, that's where you have Jupiter and Pluto, and they are in Cancer, or sorry, Jupiter, Uranus, and they're in Cancer, but they're not with Pluto. They're in a semi-sextile. They're close, but they're not there. Cancer, Leo. So then the next one, you're like, okay, it's got to get close to Pluto. Again, oh yeah, that's still there in 55. And 68 is where you go, oh, okay, Jupiter, Uranus, and then Pluto's in Virgo. It's not in Libra. Right? Mm-hmm. Where I would say the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction really kind of hitting hard is when the North Node's at the 0 point of Aries, which that puts the whole world on the same draconic chart. And that's 69, and that's the year we make it supposedly to the moon. Huh. And so you can think of that as a renaissance as leaving the Earth.
But you said Sun South Node is the other renaissance, and this is Sun North Node, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's not the exact day. It was July of, we can go to July really quick, of 69, while that, the Apollo missions are happening, and there's Jupiter, Uranus on that 0 point Libra, 0 Libra solstice point, or sorry, equinox point in opposition, but the North Node is now in Pisces. Ironically enough, where are we going over this next year? Same thing. And we're trying to go back to the moon with the North Node in Aries coming into Pisces. Chiron in Aries too.
So around the late 60s, though, then there's another touch off of another type of
I would say it's a
renaissance.
building on top of the 64-65 Pluto-Uranus conjunction. Mm-hmm. And if you look at 1457, that's the Pluto-Uranus conjunction with Jupiter, so that's like an extra big kick. And then the eclipses come in 59 on top of all that. And then it just kind of continues to keep going. And then there's that radical stuff that happens, the once in a lifetime stuff that happens in 1555 that Nostradamus shows of the Mars retrograde, the Venus retrograde, and the oppositions in the longest period of switching signs and staying in opposition for the longest period that will never happen again, ever. I don't know how he figured that out in 1555, but he did.
Huh.
So that's what I'll show people is like the peak of it. We could probably come to a close consensus with people that maybe the middle of the Renaissance is 1555, right? Like, it's like, that's the kind of peak. And this is his preface date. And you see that Venus at 26 degrees of Pisces opposing Mars and Chiron, but opposing Mars, both retrograde. There's the North Node on the opposite side. So if you notice when he says it all ends is when the North Node's in Sag on the opposite side. And that Venus went retrograde in Leo, and there's Saturn at the 0 point. And guess what we're going to have next year? A Venus retrograde in Aries back into Pisces with Saturn at that 0 point.
So like 1555.
So, right. So if I go to 1555 and I go, all right, let's see what happens. Let's go to today. And let's just go to the Venus retrograde. right? March 1st, 2025. Now, I know he's on Julian calendar of March 1st, right? But that's kind of weird that the Gregorian's March 1st. It's a little different astrologically, but still, Venus retrogrades in Aries here at 10 degrees. And that north node is right there in Pisces. And there's Neptune at 28 degrees. And there's Saturn at 20. And what starts to happen is, as we go through the month of the retrograde, we see Neptune now at the 0 point and Venus crossing over that with the north node. And then there's Saturn coming. And then within a month period of time, Saturn's coming and Venus and Neptune. And then Saturn within that month, June 1st, 0 point of Aries, Neptune, 1 degree, and Venus still in Aries. Chiron, eclipses will happen at that time. To me, I've predicted for the last year that's where the whole world, what we've been all waiting for to see what happens is in that period.
Wow.
That's the Hypergate X point.
Okay, so then that's a period of time where it's not a great time in Europe, 1555.
No,
right,
and there's plagues.
And that's when Mary I had returned England back to Catholicism. So, I mean, not that, I guess if you were Catholic, that was a
there's
wonderful
10
thing.
commandments in Louisiana at every school now.
Right, so it's the idea of going back to a better past.
That doesn't work out.
And wanting to do it through the institutions, but it doesn't last long, and
no, it fails.
Not too many people get killed in 1555. I mean, there were Protestants burned publicly, but...
And what's interesting is coming into 2025 is a Mars retrograde that's happening, building up to a Venus retrograde, and Mars comes direct as Venus then goes retrograde within the same week. But it's very hard to have Mars and Venus retrograde at the same time and have the Sun oppose Mars retrograde, right? Like that's the opposition of a Mars retrograde. Like, you know, you don't see Mars retrograde and the Sun conjunct, or you only see Cazimis with Mercury and Venus. You don't see a Cazimi with Mars. So when the Sun's opposing a planet outside of Mercury, Venus, that's when you know it's at its peak retrograde. And that's also in Helio when we're in direct, you know, connection with that, we're passing that planet. Right? So
okay, so
we start 2025 with, oh crap, Venus is starting to come into Pisces where it'll be retrograde. There's Saturn there, and we're in a Mars retrograde that's in opposition to Pluto. January 1st. And that stays with us that whole year of that ingress chart or that electional chart of 2025 it's probably one of the most gnarly years of our lives that we'll ever go through. And I feel like this is the crescendo of the Renaissance we've lived through. That was like a 60-year Renaissance period. Because then Pluto and Uranus start to make their trine in the years that follow. But from my Nostradamus research, it's the sextile or the trines where it's the exiting stage of whatever it is. If it's a Renaissance, it's an exit of a period. So the idea of technology and where we've been for the last 60 years is exiting by 2027.
So by 2027, we have no more innovations happening in technology, or technology.
My question will be if there's going to be enough people around to do it.
No. Okay, well.
Right? Think about that. Like,
yeah.
Or is there going to be enough resources, or is there going to be enough energy? Is there going to be enough? It always takes a fall in order to create a renaissance, truly. So it's kind of like maybe another way to put it was the last 60 years was a warm-up renaissance. Like a Shakespearean dress rehearsal?
Could be.
But
that's the thing with the Renaissance. It happened in different regions of Europe at different times. And so Oh, sorry. I don't know what I was looking up 1555, right? But the Renaissance itself, I think that might be here, has these different stages, right? So in the 15th century, the idea of the Republic in Italy was, especially in Venice, where the Medici were, that's what they would have wanted their art to support, is this new idea of a new republic.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the church was also, they were really big supporters of the Renaissance. But we really see so much of the innovation happening in this really small part of Italy, where they're really trying to establish something new. But at the same time, taking the old order and applying it to new people, right? So you get these families that have a lot of money, who came out of banking, so they built themselves up. Mm-hmm. And then you have also traditional dukes and people who had titles who also wanted to support art to make themselves more powerful. So it's like there's a mixture. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a mixture of old ideas of leadership and new ideas. And there's this new idea about who is a valuable individual in society. And artists, I think that's what's different about the Renaissance, is that you have the old structures that are always going to be there, and it always takes someone's money to be able to create new things. But what's different about the Renaissance is you've got these old people who were once thought of to be craftspeople, right? Like when we talked about Leonardo da Vinci, who starts as a craftsperson, goes through the apprenticeship, does his painting of the Annunciation, and then is like he's this grand guy. Then he creates things like, I wanted to show this earlier, so I'm going to show a mechanical lion that he created based on ideas that he thought about in his notebooks, right? So there's these inner workings within that lion that made it so it could move around by itself and open up its mouth and drop out these lilies on the floor. This is just a reconstruction. It's not the original, but it was based on his designs. But he's doing these sorts of things that seem so superficial to us. And I'm trying to think of, where do we see that now, right? And I guess if we see ideas of any wealthy people, innovative people who are creating new technologies for wealthy individuals, right? They have to make a living on one hand, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, they're creating these new innovations that can be used in many different ways as well.
Well, I think the problem, because Regulus went into Virgo, is that it was normal to be like, well, just go back to the 2000s. It was like, okay, you were connected. That makes sense. Today, now that Regulus is in Virgo, and Virgo is an energy that has to be happy with the work in the field, right? Like, it's about her sincerity of it, right? It's about her humbleness in it. That we are in a society now where it's like, you're doing more than just working in the fields. You must be connected to something bigger. So it's like a conspiracy now. Like, it's always a conspiracy of like, this person is doing something great, they must have some sort of help. And that if that's a bad thing now, or being recognized, it's like the lobster cage problem.
So could it be that today's people who are innovating and doing this kind of technology, right? Because there's the first robot knight. I also wanted to show that, and that
the first of Skynet.
Yes, there you go. That was the Leonardo da Vinci Terminator. But that was created for a festival, not for anything real. I always think of Bedknobs and Broomsticks and those knights at the end. That's what I think of.
I love that, though, because that thing is like, hi, I'm here.
Exactly. Well, with two staffs.
And honestly, those staffs like would penetrate For real, I feel like I bet you people saw those, or knights would have seen those and been like, hey, can I like have one of those? That'd be a lot easier.
Right. I don't know. I wonder. I mean, it seems very ceremonial too, but yeah. I mean, he made Leonardo da Vinci made many tools that were meant for warfare and to establish the power of the states. But what I was thinking is, okay, so he's in this more Leo-based Renaissance, if we think of it that way. I don't know.
They kind of look like Swiss guards at the Vatican.
The Vatican Swiss guards?
Because they carry.
Maybe.
With the red, too?
That's the era. So now would we look at the people who are innovating that are supposed to be for the people? They're the ones who are going to be pushing new technologies forward?
Right.
Or is it people who claim to be doing it for the good of humanity? Are they doing it from a Virgo perspective now, or?
Well, I think that's where the last Venus retrograde of last year finally retrograded in Leo, right? We're done with the Venus retrogrades in Virgo.
Okay.
And then you have to remember that in the 1450s, Venus was retrograding in Cancer. It was retrograding in Sag. It was retrograding in Libra. It was retrograding in places it likes to be. So if you look at now, if you're alive watching this, you have lived through the worst Venus retrogrades that ever have lived. Right? So it's always Venus retrograde in Scorpio, the worst place, right? Or Aries, the worst place. Or Gemini, where it's neutral. Or Capricorn. We saw Aquarius, but that started in the Capricorn in the last 2 cycles, right? During the Pluto Capricorn transit that we've been in under. Or Virgo, but now it's Leo. So now the first stage is taking place to where not everything is going to be made in China and cheap anymore. Or some people got upset with me, and I was talking about this with Natalie in full disclosure, but I'm like girls aren't going to be wearing as much makeup. Like, I used Botticelli Venus. Like, was she wearing a bunch of makeup? Sure. Maybe they used a little bit of, like, this overdone of beauty products. It's all because Venus is retrograding in signs it does not beautify in. Right? So that means that our art looks crappy. That our furniture looks like the modern furniture of today is not going to be used. It reminds me of the 90s with like seashell lamps.
What? People aren't using those?
No, with the glass round wood table with the glass top with the weird drapes. That was just 30 years ago.
Those supposed to be homemade or look homemade or something? I don't know.
Or the 80s, right? Where they were still using wood or shag carpet in the 70s, like, and because you couldn't afford new carpet, the shag's cool, right? I'm just looking for some grated cheese on the ground.
Okay, so
Parmesan cheese. That's Hunter Biden, but
are we innovating now? So are we going to now see more quality art or things that
I think the Leo aspect of it is going to be entertainment.
Okay.
And art and music. But architecture, meh. For those who have status of the people, that's what's hard is Pluto's coming into Aquarius. There becomes a lot of bitter human beings that people are in different categories of life based off their destiny. And then there's that aspect of the Pluto-Uranus we're under of Virgo. We're not even at the opposition yet. We're about to come into the trine. Where even that one to me is like, who's smart enough to figure it all out? Who can carry information forward when digital fails? Because the one thing we're not thinking about is like the printing press. You can get books from them still. I mean, they cost money and you got to store them correctly. But 95% of all the data that's electronic right now will be lost at some point. or scrubbed, or, servers get old, hard drives get old, clouds aren't guaranteed. So,
and that's Pluto and Aquarius?
Yeah, where all of it gets lost and rewritten. Because if you think about it, it's like, okay, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, they rewrite all the laws. They rewrite the way that you never believed it could happen, and it does. So the idea that we could just keep surviving off clouds, and when I mean clouds, I'm talking about electronic cloud servers and storage, and that your computer will always store all of your data and your pictures and all of your files. That's why I recommend people print still their files and get good laser jet printer paper, and you can buy 3-ring binder versions of printer paper and buy 3-ring binders and keep your files in a book. Especially if you're a corporation, I have to keep, you've helped me with how much paperwork I have.
Yeah. You've got all of the paperwork too.
It's so much paperwork.
You have it printed out.
It's so heavy, I can't even carry it.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we have to kind of look at, is like, well, in the Renaissance, maybe a lot of the stuff that sticks is the stuff that's built to last or worthy of the words on the paper.
Right. So it's not just about the innovations.
Mm-hmm. It's about,
right. It's about
what helps
printed.
society move forward and become what we want to be remembered as. Because something about the Renaissance period is why I like going into Nostradamus, especially, is as an astrologer, he goes, yeah, this is nice, but you're not looking at the shadow of the plagues happening, the corruption, the power structures, the heresies, like all this stuff happening. And look what's happening right now. There's all these great things, but with great things comes this huge shadow. And I think that's where I would rather be in these periods because there's more happening. So, but when people want the shadow stuff to go away, they pull also the good stuff too at the same time. It starts over.
Huh.
So the idea in nature is that, like, let's get rid of the nighttime. Well, that means the daytime will go too, because the sun would go with both.
Interesting.
So the more people are trying to pull the shadow that's coming with all the good stuff, they take the good stuff with it too. Spiritually. And then it starts over. So I really think it's really funny how if you focus too much on the bad, then you're not focused on the good, then you're ripping the good without ever appreciating the good. And then once the bad's gone, the good's gone.
Right.
That's just the laws of divine nature. So,
well, when people are focusing on whatever they think is the bad, it's because they have an idea of what needs to stay the same, right? It's sort of, okay, I'm comfortable how I'm living right now, and I don't want this thing I see coming that's bad, and it's going to change my life. But they don't often think about, well, the things you're comfortable with are also going to be going, right?
Correct.
But then,
or like to go back into that to become a master, but it was you told me it was 10,000 hours.
Yeah, well, there's that theory that it takes 10,000 hours to master something. And so we were talking about the idea of becoming a master at your craft and how it took 7 years in an apprenticeship to work it your way through.
Which is, again, an alchemical spiritual number. Because it would have been they're taking what in Magi alchemy would be the number 7 to reach that, and then even in John Dee's work too.
Yeah, and if we back up with that idea even more, it was just kind of this idea that people look at the past, at paintings like Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, and they think, how could that have even been done? Right? That's not even possible to make paint that thin or whatever it is. But if you actually look at the fact that they're designing and craft in workshops with way more people who are all working on some element of what's happening.
And they're not on a cell phone being distracted.
Yeah. And they're just working, this is what you're doing with your life. You became an apprentice at the age of 14 for Leonardo, and you're working every day in this workshop
and
with
nights
a master.
because
yes,
we didn't start sleeping the way we sleep until the 20th century, basically, in the early 19th century or late 19th century, just the beginnings of the ideas of midnight was the second wake, and then you had your second sleep, and your social time was at midnight.
right.
And that's why astrologers were normality, to be looking at the stars and to be looking at so I live in a world as an astrologer where nobody wants to go at 2 a.m. to go look at the planets. Like, what are you talking about? I'm asleep at that time. But all society was the second wake, the second sleep. And a lot of people went to bed at like 5 a.m. and then slept in the morning till like 10 a.m. and that was the second sleep. So it was like 2 sleeps.
Exactly.
So those workshops, they would be working at midnight. It'd be like, oh, I'm coming in. How was your first sleep? It was great. I'm going back to getting really
back to
fine.
Mary's hand.
I'm taking all that fine powder to make it so tiny, and the layers, because that's not. Yeah, I think that that hit me so hard when you told me that, because I showed Ann a video of like, there's all these spiritual people online trying to be like, there was some other alien or something that was making all this stuff, or it's a real picture. But it's like, no, they spent 3-4 years on a painting full with workshop, and then that 10,000 hour thing I think is totally true, because if you're like, they use chess as the example, like nobody's been proven to become a chess master after just a year or whatever, just like, yeah, I'm really good at chess. Like, no, after about a decade of doing chess
Right.
full time, 10,000 hours of it, then you can go really compete. Or like, I think of myself as an astrologer, like, yeah, okay, I got 41,000 hours of video of astrology. Okay, yeah, that makes sense after 12 years.
And that's just the video, and behind the scenes,
Right.
you're doing
correct.
even more.
It's never ending.
So it's just, I don't even know. That's the aspect of the Renaissance and the products that get put out during those times when people are free to do it. The part that people don't think about is the hours that went into it. And if we start to say, okay, well, it's because an alien came down and did it. I mean, I'm not saying that didn't happen. It could have happened. But what I'm saying is that you discount or you discredit human capacity to be able to perfect an art. And that's part of the way that we've been trained since the Industrial Revolution. Like, the Industrial Revolution imposed a new educational system where we don't think like the people did in the Renaissance, right? That we're not trained in every discipline, the people who had an education, right? We're not trained in math and science and music and everything, right? And English, or whatever your language is, and Latin.
Yes.
And I'm not saying everybody should, but it got people thinking in ways that we consider now out of the box thinking. That's just how people were trained.
Yeah, because
So-
even if John Dee and Edward Kelly were talking to spirits and angels, they still had a caravan of people carrying their stuff all through Europe, and it was years and years and years and years of talking to spirits and following where the spirits told them to go. It wasn't like the aliens dropped down and said, "You're going to Turkey. You're going over here."
Well, and I mean, even okay, but even if they did,
Right.
when they got there and when they start channeling the stuff, you had to know what you were seeing. And the thing is that whatever was speaking to John Dee, for example, or is it Edward Kelly?
Both, yeah.
What was speaking to them was speaking in these images that connected to
A
their
lot of
existing
archangels,
knowledge,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So they knew, okay, I know this angel is connected to all these people because they were scholars as well, because they had studied, so that they had access to this language, I think. And then, but there's also the part of there's this whole new language
there was stuff that they were kind of surprised by, or things that they didn't know in Apocrypha, because they only took them to Apocrypha. They didn't take them to the Bible.
But I think that's the thing, that every time we advance as a society, it's based on the old knowledge and the things that are there. So if society takes away that foundational base of knowledge, you can't advance to the next level as as quickly or as high. Because I think what I see happening in a historical way is knowledge and learning being more accessible by more people, and then it's restricted. And then it's more accessible, and then it's restricted. That's kind of what you see if you look at Western history, especially. I don't know why.
Or I think in modern times, I mean, when I got on reality shows, I remember I'm like, I'm going to be on this reality show. It's going to make me famous, and I'm done. And it was quite the opposite. It was like, here's your 15 minutes of fame with no money. What?
Right.
And then it was like the most humbling moment of my life. Like, I have to actually go do this work. And then it really was the last 12 years of nonstop work to where I'm like, oh my God. Okay. I can actually go up here and make shows like this and stuff like that. Like, you know?
And now we're to a point where
and people don't want to do that work. That's the problem.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I just keep trying to think of what are the connections between the Renaissance and what we're experiencing now.
I would say it's the innovations that are happening. I mean, look at today. People are expressing art. They're expressing music. We have so much of it that it's overwhelming. And at that time, that would have been overwhelming to be like going from, you know, where your grandparents were in the 1300s and even early 1400s to you can go check out this beautiful art, and then the architecture starts to get nice. It's not just like huts anymore, and people are starting to, you know, create much better architecture. The society starts to actually create its own signature, let's say, right? With clothing, with fashion, with especially once the printing press comes out, knowledge spreading quicker. People that normally couldn't read the Bible could read the Bible. Now they can get other views of things to make up their own mind for the first time, instead of being told by the king or told by the church.
But not everybody had access to it, right? So,
and still they say that today, though.
That's what I think is important.
Because if you look at the world, not everybody does.
But we have more capability to have access to information than ever before, right? I mean, like if I just look at this right here is the digitized Leonardo da Vinci notebooks.
Oh, wow.
And you can actually go in and look by topics and all of that, or you can go page by page and just see what's there.
Wow, in Tools and Machines, he has 904 occurrences.
I know I picked one of the most boring pages. Let me go back. Oh, it's not wanting to go back? Okay, there we go. But yeah, Tools and Machines. You can then go down here and
human sciences. And what is he has? Physics and natural sciences.
Was that here?
It's in the yellow.
There it is. Then it shows you what all is there. So if we went to air.
Wow. I'm going to have to play with that.
Yeah, so you can see all of his drawings, and you know he wrote everything backwards. So you'd have to read it in a mirror.
I mean, that's already an impossible task, but to him, 10 years of doing that would be like how we write normally.
Well, and think about it. This was in his off hours, right?
Right,
I mean,
as he's
I don't
not
know,
doing.
Did they even sleep at all at that time? But
I mean that's what I find really interesting, though, is why I like human design is they give it. If you look at a lot of the people of that time, they all are indirect light, and that they do stay up at night. And then all people in magi or magic, they do stay up at night.
Interesting.
So,
but you know, if you go and look in Chat GPT, right? If I go in there and typed in, where can I find Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks digitized? It usually says you'll have to go search on the web yourself or something like that. It doesn't often just give you a link to something. And so that's where you need to know.
Once one of these people make a GPT themselves and make their own AI app of it, then it'll be there. But people aren't on top of that right now. So I was laughing because I got to go here in a second, but Renaissance has AI in the middle of it.
Yep, it does.
Right? So I found that really funny because people are afraid of AI right now, right? But yet, it's kind of like how people were maybe afraid to be a painter or to be a musician, or they thought, am I going too much into my, am I, especially the overhanging religious aspect of things. Like, am I going too much into my pleasures, Because there was that whole kind of like, don't go into your pleasure side too much, or your, like, just be a good person. And you see that today in the world, right? Like, I'm just doing the right thing. I'm working my 9 to 5, and I don't want to do the wrong thing. And I think it's scary for people to go into a world that has zero structure that you have to find within yourself. That's Pluto Uranus. There is no structure.
Right. I think that's what they had right in this era is that Leonardo didn't create this kind of stuff in a vacuum. He wasn't all by himself, but the structure was flexible enough so that he could be a craftsperson and learn a skill as a peasant, even that he could then, if he took the extra initiative, or he was more gifted, or he had a different view of the world, that within the structure he could utilize the things he learned for his own advantage and to learn more things than what was available to the common person. And I think it's this combination of being able to exist within find the resources that help you develop your skills, work on them, work hard on them, but don't just stop at that and think, oh yeah, I got my degree, I'm done, I'm ready to go out. Because you're not, right?
Well, I think that's where AI is like the room full of assistants for,
exactly.
Right? Because like with Astromystic, I just launched with Jim on Monday. It's all of my, not every piece yet. That's 46,000 hours, or 41 or 40,600 hours. For 40,600 hours. It's a lot of transcribing, but all the work I did over 12 years in every school and every horoscope and stuff, like as you saw, I showed you today on it, like there is no other app, including any of these other apps, I won't say their names, but the popular ones, that are literally telling you, this week Saturn's stopping, and with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's approaching in the year ahead, and like all of this stuff, and how a Mars in Scorpio really is going to act to a man, a woman, to yourself, and in sex or in fights or they don't have all that data that they've trained, and that's really all my assistants are the AI.
So you've got your own astrology workshop working for people. But
that's taking all of my work and taking the mathematical transits, and instead of using the old 80s astrologers that just kept it so boring and basic, but made it the real life that people really have connected with. And it gives it to them, and it connects with their chart, and it connects with the mundane astrology, and then the prophecy is what we're launching next month. So it'll be a prophetic app of prophecy.
That's the thing, that's where AI, I guess it can be scary if you have disempowered yourself and you're not involved in using it in a mindful way. Because you should think of it, like you just said, as an assistant. So whether
it's funny because that's what they call in the back end. You make your assistant in your playground. And if people were to see, whether it's JSON or whether it's Python codes, like it's literally just code. And like for astrology, it's like planet, where is it at? Longitude and latitude from where you're born. And okay, it's in this sign, verified, false. Is it retrograde? False, true. What do you think your software is doing? The same thing. Just this does it a million times faster.
Right. And if you don't know,
and you can't train software to, so like if you go to CoStar, and you go look on their website and you go look at what they do, they just use the astro.com JPL from NASA. They like to say, loading planets from NASA. JPL's API is free. Then to have it connect to Astrology Tropical Western, you have to connect it through astro.com Swiss Ephemeris, pay the $700 fee. So they make it seem like they're doing this huge favor for people. It was literally some dudes with money who spent no time at all. I think it was a girl did the pattern, but they literally took millions of dollars and then they give people crap. Like it told me I was supposed to be wearing stilettos on Saturday. So it actually is not even close to smart. Whereas we know you're a man or a woman, if you tell us that, it will never give you stiletto.
Right.
That's how bad it is out there. Think about that. Actually, people would rather have somebody give them a horoscope online that says that they should be wearing stilettos rather than and be more afraid of one that actually is more attuned to who you are and what's actually happening in the world and what's actually happening with the bigger transits and what's actually happening in the future, that's predicting the future and not looking at it from just such a basic, simple, like one day at a time, like the old school, 80s way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of it like if we look at the movable type in the books, right? You could have been the person that just sat there and waited for the new book to get to you and trust the information and just say, okay, now I know everything because it was printed and it's the truth. Or you could be a person that knows the text and the back, knows the documents that were the original,
right,
and then sets it to the type.
Right.
Or you could be someone who knows enough so that well, is this a good a good translation of a book, right, or not? And that's the same with AI. That if you don't know what you're designing, if you just decided to pull all these things together and throw it in the app, and that's it, then you can't double check it because a lot of it is the training and making sure
there's nobody double checking it.
Yeah.
There's nobody adding to it. They wanted the quick, easy Pluto Capricorn. People will just be satisfied. And next year, just because it's a little different, we're throwing an extra thing. It won't be stilettos. It'll be this or whatever. That's all it is. And that's what most astrology programs are, is they're just up every year when this Jupiter conjuncts your sun, they'll give you the same horoscope.
Right.
In the software world, right? So it's like that's where it's a whole new ball game. Plus, we're mixing human design, helio astrology. The helio is going to be the crazy part because that's never been done before yet in AI. Like none of them have even attempted it. And predicting based off that 12 years of learning helio from Michael Erlewine and understanding that there's more of an impact from the helio mixed with the geo that CoStar is not even thinking about yet. Mm-hmm. Well, they can't. They don't. They took the easy route. But that's where the Renaissance is innovators that we always go, I can't believe they're able to do it like that. We're in that moment right now. Like people are obsessed with like Tesla, right? But really, somebody can go in their garage and do that right now. So that's the thing where nobody can go pull off a Da Vinci at this moment.
With like technology or
just even with any
they could. I would say they could if
I'd like to see somebody write backwards for two decades with all this stuff while doing works of art that inspire the world for the next 800 years plus.
Yeah.
That's the Renaissance to me, is like these people who show up, change society, and impact societies in the future to still look back and go, magnificent.
And I guess we don't know who those people will be.
No, ChatGPT just picked Elon Musk and a bunch of random girls we had never heard of.
Yeah.
But that's where, I think because it maybe is looking at now, but it's like, You know, you can take like television, like Johnny Carson television, right? Like people like he's interviewing people in the world who are impacting people that they're inspired by. And he was the first talk show host that really took that role and with comedy and made other comedians become big and made other people, you know, it's a show that was like a show that if you were on that, you were somebody that got to go to the next level. It reminds me of like if you were to be in a Shakespeare theater and be part of the play and a king was there, like James, and be like, I'm part of this? That like there's that huge, that's what sucks though, is like the names and because it is, the Renaissance I think all have Pluto and Capricorn and New Aquarius as well. Except I would say the one in the 1776 through 78 was a renaissance of the people breaking free of structures, but we're having that too, but we're also having all this innovation and stuff at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, because if you notice, the innovation's really slow from 1778 until the 1900s, because like we go from muskets to muskets slash some of the first guns that really are with a bullet per se that can self-fire. I mean, you know, and cannons, that there was cannons in the 17, you know.
Yeah, different types of forts that are basically the same fort.
Nothing changes until the 1900s, so.
Yeah, interesting. And it seems like around the 1850s where you saw one of those points that, like one of the charts you showed, is a big innovation for the use of chemistry for gunpowder and the machine gun. Yes. I don't know all the history for that, but definitely technology for warfare changes at that time.
Yeah, by World War I.
Yep.
Which doesn't go well. Nobody gets far.
Well, and by the Civil War, like that's where we see.
Well, the Civil War proves that it just is not, I mean, but who really wins? It's just who has more people.
Yeah.
And that's sad. Because that's still the bloodiest battle of all time, so. More than World War II battle. Gettysburg.
Well, we could go on and on.
Yep.
But you said
I gotta go.
Need to stop.
But it was great, and we appreciate everybody for being here to watch History in the Stars. And of course, you can join us on highvibe.tv to watch all the shows. They're all early now. I've changed my whole schedule. So if you're out there in the YouTube world, being like, well, Leo King always does it late. No, everything's early now. And
you can still watch the recordings at any time you want.
Yes, you can. So we appreciate you. We'll see you all later. Take care. Thanks, Ann, and I'll see you all, and we'll see you all on the next one. We're every 2 weeks now, by the way. And then Ann's starting a history show that's in between that I'm helping her with on the in-between Wednesdays. So.
And that's only on High Vibe, right?
Or I mean, no? we'll be putting stuff out.
Okay.
The whole things will be on High Vibe, but we'll be giving you the good teasers that'll help.
Okay. Sounds good.
You know what I mean? So. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Experience astrology like never before with Astromystic. Forget generic horoscopes. Astromystic combines the wisdom of a seasoned astrologer with advanced AI to bring you real-time, personalized astrology. We have just rolled out the new beta. Astromystic is your daily dose of astrology, or your mystical guide with love, career. You can ask anything. Our special Mystic Vision can help you see your future, while being the first AI astrology to also integrate the mundane astrology transits. Trained with the work of celebrity astrologer David Lawrence Palmer, the Leo King, and with over 12 years of astrology content, a solid 41,600 hours of it to be precise. The Leo King's prophecy astrology, and all his schools and astrology teachings, give you the opportunity to be part of history, as now astrology has never been able to do what it can now. With so many features, and exciting future ones that are rolling out, anyone can use this massive upgrade to astrology to learn, be more conscious, or see into why someone you like doesn't respond to you. What are their turn-ons and turn-offs? How do you prepare for the week, or next month? Is it a good time for love or work? And we give you the actual mind-blowing details. Let your astrology imagination run wild, or at least let Astro Mystic help you with our mystic visions. Astro Mystic ensures you get the freshest, most accurate astrological advice. Share the magic with friends and discover how the stars influence your life together. Astro Mystic. Put your ego aside and let Astro